Microsoft and OpenAI, we've been talking about, are deep in talks to rewrite the terms of their relationship. And a lot of it comes down to AGI, because right now, Microsoft's $13.75 billion deal with OpenAI gives it access to OpenAI's models until 2030, or until OpenAI declares it has reached AGI, artificial general intelligence. This milestone is very vaguely defined as maybe AI that outperforms humans at most economically valuable work. Now, if that happens, if there is some agreement that AGI has been reached, Microsoft could lose access to OpenAI's technology. Now, this becomes a problem for Microsoft because they've built Copilot, Azure, GitHub, and much of their AI strategy around OpenAI's models. So currently, the two are working on a new deal, one that would let Microsoft keep using the tech even after AGI is declared, while also negotiating a potential equity stake in the reportedly low to mid 30% range. However, there is plenty of friction and details to work out here. OpenAI wants more revenue, looser constraints on who it can sell to, and stricter guardrails on how Microsoft deploys its models. Microsoft, meanwhile, has blocked some of OpenAI's acquisitions and may not be afraid to walk away if the terms don't work. So, Paul, I mean, we've been following this back and forth for some while now. Seems like there's plenty to work out, but it does actually seem, based on this newer information, there's some movement happening. So do you think they're going to work this out in any timely fashion?
I don't know. I mean, without being in the room, obviously, and only being able to read whatever, the information or Bloomberg gets access to, you have to assume they eventually just find a way to get this deal done. Like, both sides need this deal.
Yeah.
But there's so many complexities here. There's the definitions of AGI and who gets to decide when it's been reached. There's Microsoft's access to OpenAI's models. There's the fact that OpenAI's compute needs are what's driving largely Azure's rocket growth, like the growth of the cloud computing business for Microsoft, billions of dollars per quarter probably being spent with Microsoft. There's Microsoft's own AI ambitions under Satya and Mustafa Solomon, who's the CEO of Microsoft AI, former Google DeepMind co-founder and Inflection AI founder. Competition for business customers. They're increasingly coming up against each other and selling against each other. OpenAI's desire for more compute beyond what Microsoft can or is willing to provide, which means they're having to go to people like Google and Oracle. OpenAI's IPO desires, their need to change their business structure. OpenAI's funding, which is dependent upon them changing their business structure. So there's all these things that we've talked about over the last year and a half on the podcast. It's not an easy deal to get done. There's lots of variables here. And then the other thing to throw into the mix here, Mike, is I was listening to this podcast last week. I never actually listened to this podcast before. It's Lenny's podcast. It's called Lenny Retiski. I don't know if you've ever listened to this one before.
Yeah.
But he had Benjamin Mann on, who's a co-founder and AI safety researcher at Anthropic. He started Google DeepMind. But he was talking about the economic Turing test. And I think he might be the guy who kind of coined this. The way I've seen it now talked about on a couple, he was a No Priors podcast. He talked about this as well. And I don't know that he gave attribution to someone else. So if someone else came up with this concept, we'll mention them in a future episode, but he's the guy talking about it right now. So his idea of the economic Turing test is sort of like everyone's trying to figure out how do we define AGI, and they're basically trying to move the goalpost and say, well, let's just not even try and do that. Let's just set an economic Turing test. Mm. So the Turing test being, does the human know if they're interacting with a machine or not, going back 70 years. And that's sort of been achieved. We've passed that. So what they're saying the economic Turing test is, this is how he described it. He said, it's this idea that if you contract an AI agent for a month or 3 months on a particular job, if you decide to hire that agent and it turns out to be a machine rather than a person, then it's passed the economic Turing test for that role. So what he's saying is a human hires someone virtually. They don't know if it's a human or a machine. That human or machine does work for a month or 3 months on a particular job. And then the human, the person doing the hiring has to decide, am I going to hire, professional A, professional B? And then unbeknownst to them, they choose to hire the agent over the human. And so that's what they're saying the economic Turing test is where a human doesn't know that it's an agent doing the work. And he said, and if the agent can pass the economic Turing test for 50% of money-weighted jobs, then we have transformative AI. So he's saying as an economy, once we get to the point where a human in a blind taste test basically chooses the agent over the human worker 50% or more of the time for like 50% of jobs, then we have entered this age where it is inescapable. Like we are in true transformation of the economy, 10% plus GDP growth every year. And he talks about this as 2027, 2028. And Anthropic tends to usually be more conservative than others. So, you know, how all that kind of stuff factors in, whether this is part of the negotiations with Microsoft and OpenAI, I don't know. But it seems like this sort of more concrete, quantitative test to say, hey, we're past AGI. This is what's missing from the AGI conversation, basically. So it's just interesting to note. And it's a really, really good episode. Like we'll put the link in the show notes. It's one of those I'll probably listen to multiple times and take notes on next time.
Well, as a funny corollary to that, that's probably happening in some way with humans getting jobs they're not remotely qualified for because they're using AI to game hiring, like we've talked about.
For sure. And probably like Fiverr and sites like that, where you have humans that are applying for jobs, getting jobs, and then they're letting the agent do the work.
Exactly.
And like the person hiring them has no idea that that's what's happening. I can almost guarantee you that's happening a ton. And people are making a lot of money having agents doing most of the work.